especially since people are watching historic movies on Blu-ray, it's like, well, are you looking at a film print of this movie, or are you looking at a digital transfer? And does that like when was it done? Like they had very different ideas about like how a telecine should happen in the in the early 2000s versus now. And so it's like it's tricky. There's film is so many things.
The telecine look back in the 90s did not look so good. You see a lot of like really strange highlights that are like burnt to a crisp and kind of like orange.
I don't know if people think of that as the film look, but it's film and it looks like film, but it doesn't look like There Will Be Blood.
Welcome to Color and Coffee, a podcast that's focused on the craft of color and the artist behind it. I'm your host, Jason Bodak, and each episode we'll sit down with some of the most talented artists in the industry and have a casual chat from one artist to another. We'll share their stories, their insights, their tips, and maybe even a little gear talk. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, join us for some great color discussion. Sit back, relax. You're listening to Color and Coffee. Welcome to this episode of Color and Coffee. I'm Jason Bodak, your host, and I'm so excited to share with you who I have for this episode. I have with you the Video Village team, the makers of Scatter, Screen, Lattice, and Filmbox. I have Greg Cotten and Andrew Finch. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hi. Thanks for
All right,
having
thank
us.
you.
Thank you guys for joining us. I have so many questions that I want to ask you guys, but really, first off, can you describe what you guys do?
We started we went to film school and then we shot various things for a while. I worked in visual
As
effects for a
DPs, as
while.
DPs,
Yeah.
yes, we yeah.
I worked in VFX for a while and I was also a colorist for a while. And then we started doing this stuff for Greg almost more than 10 years ago. And then for me, probably 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, so Andrew
So,
and
but
I went to film school 2008 through 2012, Chapman University down in Orange County. And we both kind of like were DP emphasis film production majors. We met there. We were good friends now. We were good friends then as well. We kind of were always working together and figuring out how to do interesting cool things, and we're really always interested in color grading and the tech side of filming things as well as the creative side. Basically moved up to LA after that, and I think we both tried our hand at shooting things, and Andrew kind of did more than that, wanted to also be a director and kind of still is a director in a sense, made a really cool short film. I'm now vamping Andrew instead of myself. I guess I should say I still am kind of a working DP. Shot features and commercials and music videos over the years, and recently had a movie premiere at Sundance and win the Audience Award there
Congrats.
in 2025 called Twinless, and just came out in theaters like this past weekend with this man James, who's also Chapman. He's the director of Twinless. I'm still attempting to be a DP, but also run a software company that caters to the post and I guess just the film industry in general. So that's kind of my angle. I'll let Andrew speak for himself.
Yeah. So, Andrew, tell me a little bit about yourself. You have done, based on your website, like all these sorts of hardware and software projects before jumping into Filmbox and the Video Village stuff.
yeah, not so much hardware. Those were aspirational, but I was in GFX initially out of college and then made a short film, kind of did all the jobs myself. And I, at the time I was also DPing commercials and things like that. And then at some point I sort of transitioned into color only, color grading. And then around 2017 or so, Greg and I decided to start thinking about what ultimately became Filmbox. And we've kind of been working on that since COVID. COVID gave
Yeah.
us some time to like really like focus on it.
We had put Filmbox kind of on the back burner a little bit, and then COVID came around and we're like, I think we're gonna have enough time just to kind of work on this and release it. So that was how Filmbox was born, for sure.
For the past 5 years, it's pretty much just been Filmbox and Scatter and Video Village in general.
So, before we jump into what I know, Filmbox, I want to go back a little bit because a lot of the viewers and listeners don't know this, but you guys were actually one of the reasons that I converted over to Mac OS because you guys created Lattice.
Mhm.
And for those of you that don't know, Lattice is, I call it a LUT like laboratory. What would you call it?
Yeah, it was kind of like the idea is like a Swiss Army knife. Like, what are these kind of opaque almost files that we use to exchange color grading information that often are in formats that don't talk with each other and can't be read by other programs. And so that was kind of my initial inspiration, was like, how do we open these files? How do we view them? What do they look like? That was kind of the inspiration for Lattice.
It's an app that I use every single week, if not like multiple times a week. You nailed it. Like it's a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably on its 11th year of life at this point. I think I made it in 2014. I think it's the first release was 2014 on the App Store. So yeah, it's had a very long life on the Mac, and yeah, we still use it for stuff. Andrew and I,
Yeah, I use it
obviously.
every day.
Yeah.
It's one of those apps that I think a lot of people ask why. And after moving over to macOS, I've actually moved my entire facility and studio over to macOS. But one of the things that I like about certain macOS, specifically Lattice, is it's focused on one thing and it does it incredibly well. It's not really obsessed with throwing in extra features or expanding. It does this one
Yeah.
thing and it does it incredibly well. That's all it does.
Yeah, it's not a general purpose creative like look development tool, though you can obviously use it to modify creative looks that were burned into a LUT, for example, and or extract certain aspects of them. And basically, yeah, it's a utility for people that need it, and people that need it know they need it, and so they get it. It's kind of the idea. Um,
Exactly. So huge heart for me. And I know a lot of other people that love it just as much as me. So
Good.
after that, you jumped on to Screen. So
Yep.
what inspired you to create Screen?
This man that is over here, Andrew, was kind of the initial impetus for Screen, or basically made a little manifesto PDF of like, this is what a video player should look like, and it doesn't exist on the Mac at least.
Well, before
They
that,
should.
though, I think, didn't you kind of start by trying to make an image sequence viewer or
I
DPX
did,
viewer?
yeah. I mean, it started as, yes, I did start playing around with the idea of like, is there anything to be done here with image sequence playback? Because it wasn't really easily done, in like a very efficient small app, like not opening something up in Resolve, just double clicking a DPX file, it loads the entire sequence, you can play it back, that sort of thing. So it started as that, and then Andrew kind of quickly saw that I was working on that, and he was like, well, what if you just made a general purpose video player that didn't get in your way with like the UI over the video while you're playing it back, such as QuickTime Player X, which was, I think, QuickTime Player 7 was no longer available anymore. And that was like the more like had more pro features than QuickTime Player X, which is like very much like kind of a baby app. The idea was like, okay, just make a general purpose like video playback tool for professionals, or geared toward professionals. There needs to be time code. There needs to be like an easy way to screen grab things with color management and all that. So I took a very deep dive and learned a lot of things the hard way in terms of just how difficult it is to make a video player work, and media playback in general, audio sync, working with various raw formats, camera raw format, even supporting adding in like support for like FFmpeg decoding as like a fallback. So lots of things learned. Probably learned a little bit too much about how videos are encoded and decoded. That's what Screen is, and that was kind of like what the development process was.
So essentially, if I were to sum it up in like one sentence, it's a post-production friendly video player.
That's the idea. Yeah. And, you want to apply a LUT to it, you just drag and drop the LUT onto the viewport and it just goes. Or, you need a screenshot and you want embedded color space information in there so that it looks correct on somebody else's display, even if it's in gamma 2.4 or whatever, like that sort of thing. Or if the video was intended to be viewed in a gamma 2.4 environment but wasn't tagged as such, for example, you can say, hey, this is a gamma 2.4 thing, and it will adjust the viewport accordingly and work with actually the Mac OS native color management to make it look correct. And then obviously HDR as well, and that's a whole other thing. But
That was the breakthrough for me. Honestly,
yeah.
like anybody that's listening, if you're struggling with color tags, that was the breakthrough for me, using Screen to check and QC files.
Yeah.
That was honestly a massive thing, was just being able to confirm what is this going to look like on somebody else's Mac.
Yeah.
Because we've customized our Macs. If you're using it for post-production, we've literally broken it open and customized it for our use. It's hard to imagine and really see how it's going to look on our client's machine.
Yeah, and I think actually Apple has done a pretty good job with their color management technology built into the OS. There are some obvious caveats to that, and people have over the years maybe even misinterpreted some of the issues that are going on with color management on Mac OS. But I would say for the most part, it is the has the most robust OS level color management of obviously Linux is still kind of floundering in that space. Windows kind of does supports HDR, but Mac OS has supported HDR for a very long time now. And as an app developer, it is actually quite easy to interface with the color management system and get a correct looking image. If you're willing to do it the Apple way, you can absolutely make it happen.
I want to ask, now that you sort of jumped over to the different operating systems before I move over
Yes.
to the main course, you mentioned both Linux and Windows. I know for some of your apps, you only have Mac versions, but you mentioned that the color management is so ideal on Mac.
Yeah.
Is that the reason you sort of stuck with Mac OS for some of your apps?
You know, there's a lot of vendor lock-in unless you work in a, I mean, I can get in a very technical land here by talking about this, but basically the golden path of developing an app for any of, for at least Windows or Mac OS is to use kind of the system APIs and system SDKs that they provide you. And so Mac OS has a ton, especially for image and media. macOS has a ton of native like frameworks that you can interface with to use, and that basically are not available on Windows and Linux. You'd have to use open source alternatives that have gaps or holes in them. And basically, for a long time, and this may not even be the case now, but for a long time, macOS has been the place for a developer like me who doesn't have a lot of time to create all their own infrastructure for everything from the ground up. I can get lifted up by the system level frameworks that exist on macOS. That's possibly the easiest way to explain it. That even holds true with developing our plugins. We started on macOS because it was much easier to. That's just plain and simple. That's the truth. I don't think anyone would disagree.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to simplify this out, is this similar to kind of like when you're building a game, you either start and you have to build the game engine from the ground up, or if you already have a pre-existing game engine, you can start being creative from day one?
Yes, it's a very good analogy. There are platform or operating system agnostic tools for developing apps, and obviously like we work with a lot of them. And like you look at what maybe DaVinci Resolve uses under the hood, it's something called the Qt framework that can be compiled and run anywhere and is really good if you want to create an app that has its own completely bespoke UI. But if you want something that feels native to the operating system you're running on, Resolve doesn't look native to the operating system. It looks like Resolve's UI, right? Like that's the whole point.
Yeah.
But if you want to make a native tool that's very friendly and like people who run Mac OS are familiar with, you write an app using Apple's frameworks to do so. And same for Windows. For the most part, you'd use Windows Microsoft frameworks for making an app.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah. So you do get a little locked in because of that. I
feel like a video player is uniquely dependent on those things. Like another app like Filmbox, for example, there's a lot of the development time goes into things that can be cross-platform, but with a video player,
easily cross-platform.
Most of the development is platform specific. So if you're going to make a Windows version, it's almost like you're starting off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I could have obviously made it in a more platform agnostic way to port over more easily to Windows or Linux or something. But again, I'm just one developer. That would probably double the amount of development time at minimum to get it even set up in a way that's like future proofing myself for other platforms. And it's absolutely something I think about now. You learn a lot over the years, and it's becoming easier and easier to make a good cross-platform application. Back in 2014, it was not as easy. Obviously, there are people who make like Electron apps or something, right? Like Discord, or maybe this app we're using right now, Riverside Studio FM. This might be an Electron cross-platform app that can run everywhere, but like it is not a native app. Probably gotten a little too much in the weeds there, but that is kind of my take.
I think that's really interesting. And to be perfectly honest, I'm a huge nerd in terms of technology and using the tools that works best for me. And so that's really interesting to me. And you mentioned Electron apps, and a lot of developers are starting to use those. And to be honest, I don't like them. For those of you who are aware, Electron apps make it really easy to port to both Mac and PC, but they don't tend to perform as fast. They require a lot more updates, and things like Slack, Evernote, the app we're using right now, Riverside. So you sort of get a average app, but it works for everywhere. So I can understand that you want to make something that works
Yeah,
performant on Mac and PC.
again, yeah, and it is getting easier to do that and be performant at the same time. But back then, I needed to make things that could run really close to the metal and be very performant, and that was kind of the reason I chose Mac. And it's obviously I'm used to working on a Mac, and they had at the time the world class technology for developing on their platforms. They're slowly getting beaten out by just like Visual Studio Code or whatever, think tools that are like can be used anywhere. But for a long time, Apple had the lead on that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with native apps going forward. I don't really know. But
100%. Now moving forward to cross-platform, I want to talk
yeah.
about Filmbox and Scatter. So let's jump to Scatter first, because that came out first, right?
Yeah, we released Scatter December of 2020. So it came out about 5 months before Filmbox, 5 or 6 months before Filmbox. So it was kind
Wow.
of our test run of like, let's see what people think. We had this one done and pretty much ready. Filmbox was a little bit more complicated, so we decided we'd get Scatter out and start getting people using our plugin and see what doesn't work about it.
So for those that aren't familiar with Scatter, it's essentially a physically accurate diffusion as an OFX plugin, correct?
Hmm. Yeah, emulates optical diffusion. Yeah.
Okay, so you answered my next question was what is it and what inspired you guys to do this?
It directly emulates the pieces of glass you'd put in front of a cinema camera to make it more diffused or glowy or all the different terms that people have. But inspiration for it was actually because we were making Filmbox, and part of the technology to get halation working in Filmbox, although the two phenomena are quite different, the underlying technology is somewhat related. And so we were working on Filmbox and we realized that, like, well, we've actually mostly built a diffusion emulation underpinnings if we wanted to do that. And we also, at one point, I think maybe we thought we'd include it in Filmbox. And I don't know, we had a lot of different ideas about how to make it work effectively. One thing that was really clear is that you definitely need to be able to power window scatter. And so
Yeah.
it shouldn't be in Filmbox. It should be its own thing. And then we realized,
Oh,
oh, we can actually get this to the point where it could be released faster than Filmbox because Filmbox is much more complex. And so then we decided to release it first. And so, yeah, it kind of grew out of Filmbox
yeah.
because of related technologies. And also, it's something that we wanted to be able to do. Like diffusion on set has always been a little. I come from visual effects, so like if someone's using a diffusion filter on set and they have any idea of doing visual effects, it's very scary to me as a compositor. So I sort of felt as though like diffusion is something that it's difficult to get the strength right. It changes based on the focal length of the lens you're using or the lighting environment. It's something you really want to be able to tune in the same way that you tune the color between shots. It's like a consistency problem in a lot of cases. So it seemed very valuable to have it in post as opposed to burned in.
That was something that honestly blew my mind when you guys dropped this was not the fact that you could recreate diffusion because we've been able to do that in Resolve forever, but the fact that you guys so perfectly matched it to available filters out there that I could go, hey, this one's the classic mist, the BPM 1/2, 1/8, and I could talk in DP language. That to
Yeah.
me in the suite, it's weight in gold.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously in theory, you should have been able to do digital diffusion since color grading began, minus a few computational limitations. But like, I think the big barrier is like the people who initially decide whether or not to use diffusion or the DPs or the people around them, and those people need to be able to control that technology at least initially to set the look. It's kind of difficult to just be like, oh well, it'll happen in post somehow, and in some undefined way that they don't control. That's a difficult sell for them. So it's nice to at least have a common language between colorist and DP and the ability to like relate it to something they're used to and
Or use it
plan
in
for it.
even in like for example, like a totally CG context, but
Mm-hmm.
you want
Yeah.
to, you're already emulating the lens, for example, or something. When you're rendering, maybe you also want to emulate the diffusion of some DP's choice of putting some filter in front of that lens, that CG lens. So there is benefit there as well.
I found it is something more of a trust in the fact that like you said, we'll match it in post is something that we do in color all the time. And like going back to I've worked on some big films and we make it work. We can match almost anything, but the fact that it can be you send me the filters that we're using and you trust that I'm going to make that we're going to do the exact same thing. And you can send these notes just like you can send printer points or a CDL or anything, and it's no different.
Yeah, and I think there's also something to be said for the fact that it's scene referred and it sort of, to your point of like it looks the same no matter how you use it type thing. It's not like someone's special sauce that might look different under depending on how they've set it up. If it's display referred or something like that, a DP is going to know that they can't lean on it and expect it to do a certain thing always. So yeah, there's some consistency thing there.
You nailed it. That's something that I think is really cool in the fact that you can, just like you take cameras and filters and stuff into testing, and you can be like, usually when I do a filter, I do this thing and this
Yeah.
happens to it. And you can be like, let's make sure this happens that way. And you can either check that or not. But that's the thing to me that I think is so valuable about this is I can lean on it in the same way that I do physical filters, as opposed to, I mean, probably it's something that you can test just like a piece of hardware or a piece of glass or a lens or a camera. It's just no different. And I think the gap between DPs and colorists, stuff like this is what's going to reestablish the trust and allow DPs to be more comfortable in the color suite. I mean, truly amazing job. I can go on this forever, but I mean, it's digital diffusion filters. So moving on to Filmbox, because that to me is the main course right now. What inspired you guys to build this and why did you feel that this was needed in the industry?
Yeah, so I mean, when we went to film school, the digital film transition was underway, but there was still like, most cameras that you might use, at least at a student level, were not really, they didn't really have the dynamic range to
Mhm.
be emulated into film, even if you had the technology to do it. They just really didn't capture enough. The Alexa existed, and that one was pretty good. That was basically good enough, but like, it was like this transitional phase where there was a lot of debate about like,
The Alexa didn't exist while we were in film school, really. I mean, maybe
it
like
came
what,
out, I
two
think, while we were
years
in
or
film
two
school.
or 3 years into film school.
Yeah, not
Uh,
not the first year, but
I mean, at the time, everyone was talking about red, but of
yeah.
course, at film school, the gold standard was shooting on film, either 16 or 35. And that's what you would do if you get your hands on it. That was the ultimate thing to shoot on, really, at the time.
Yeah.
And we had like a 4K scanner at Chapman, and that was so
Yeah.
cool. It was like this super expensive data cine is what they called it. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of our first introduction to film, shooting on film, at least for me.
So anyway, like after that,
Mhm.
soon after, it was like digital cameras are getting to the point where you definitely should be able to make this look pretty much indistinguishable from film if you really know what you're doing. That was, we played around with things. I was a colorist for a while, and also doing visual effects, like kind of all these things. Like I was pulling apart the data that was coming out of these cameras, and it's like there's enough here if you wanted to do it. And some other people started doing it. Obviously, film emulation has been around for a while, but like people started to
Yeah.
do good iterations of it. Then somewhere around 2017 or something, we were like, well, we now think it's silly that people feel that you can't get an authentic film look shooting digital. I get all of the like philosophical debate of like, well, some people prefer the difficulty of shooting film or the process of it. That still applies today. But like
Yeah.
people who are like, no, I know I want to shoot digital, but I just can't get it to look like film. We felt like that was sort of like a silly situation to be in 2017. And so we also wanted to use it ourselves. Like, I guess that's the biggest thing. So we started first making a thing that we wanted to just have I mean, we called it Filmbox because we wanted to literally make a piece of hardware that was a box that you put a live SDI feed into and process it live on set. Because we kind of felt like, the people who were feeling like you couldn't get an authentic film look were the non-colorists, the non-VFX people, the people who were shooting movies or directing movies who didn't really have a connection to post or the cutting edge of what was possible. And so we thought, well, it would be important for someone to just be like, well, you plug this thing into the camera and out of it comes a thing that looks to me like film. And so we kind of wanted to try to make a piece of hardware and we built some prototypes and we kind of got it working, but we just felt like we wouldn't be able to get it to
This
be
was using,
reliable enough to like
yeah.
feel like we could actually send it out without a person. And so,
And this was, to be fair, we were not like designing our own hardware. We were using off the shelf stuff to do
yeah,
it. It
I
was just
mean,
kind of like,
it's a gaming
let's
PC
make,
in there
let's
basically.
essentially, yeah. And like, let's just make this work. Was it a Hackintosh?
I think it was a
I think it was
Hackintosh.
a Hackintosh.
Additional
We were,
additional level of
because we were developing on
silliness.
Mac OS, first.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a
Oh my
Hackintosh. It was just
God.
like had some like, probably some Radeon graphics card. I don't
Yeah.
remember.
But it could take
I
a log 1080p SDI feed, process it, and send it out in real
Yeah.
time with grain and like spatial characteristics and halation and all that stuff. And it was pretty cool.
hmm
But yeah, that was like maybe 2019 or so. And then
2018, 2019, somewhere in
2018.
there.
and then we sort of like decided like, well, we should actually just, no matter what, we'll need a no effects version of this thing, even if we get the hardware to work. And so let's just focus on that first.
I don't know
And
what we
then
were
we,
thinking, why we just didn't start there, but yeah.
yeah, I
I
think we
think
sort
that's
of thought we would do
incredible.
them in parallel, but yeah,
I've
we,
heard of people wanting that, and I think it sort of goes into this mentality of I just want it to come at a camera looking like that. So I think that
yeah,
sort of goes into this film mentality. So I love that
Yeah.
you guys try to create literally not even a software MVP, but a MVP box. That to me is
Yeah.
just such
And
a hacky thing.
and you know what?
yeah.
Folks
Well,
are
and
doing that. Folks are now doing this with Filmbox, like DITs and
yeah, you
are
can
just
do
running
it
it through
with,
Resolve Live.
yeah. But
But
I mean, a big thing when we started this was that we like a big idea behind Filmbox was like we didn't want it to be a general purpose box of tools that could be assembled into something that looked like film. We wanted it to be, and this was much more of an emphasis in our marketing and everything when we started, but like we made it look as close to film as we possibly can, a very specific type of film, like contact printed Vision 3
Mhm.
negative, basically. So like we've done this work to make it look like modern process normal film. And then the idea is like you would, as the artist, treat it as a format where like it does what it does, and you change your lighting or change your intent or your shots based on its characteristics, just like if you're shooting film. Because film is like, I mean, people like to talk about how film looks a certain way, but it's like there's so many looks to film now, especially now that we scan it and do or do not use a print film emulation or all these things. But back in the day, it's like film pretty much looked like film. Like if you were in a given decade, like you shot a movie on a format that looked basically the same as every other movie that was shot, with a few exceptions. Obviously, you had some control in the development, but you made the thing look different with lighting and set design and all these things. And so we kind of thought it'd be cool to try to take that approach to film emulation, at least initially.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what the first iteration of Filmbox was trying to do.
I think you absolutely hit that. In fact, I think you guys hit it so well that it eventually became a limitation. I think
Yeah, well, and it is a limitation, and that's definitely something we knew and have definitely loosened up on since then. Like as of now, we
Well,
have
yeah. I
every.
don't.
We're at this point we're trying to aim for like basically every type of film look, and it's up to you. It's just the default one is the one we started with.
Yeah. So before I dive into your new pro update that just released, can you talk about your philosophy of profiling? If you guys would even call it profiling, like how do you guys think about the capture and I guess it is profiling for films?
I think our approach was basically by necessity, which was that we both kind of, or we our film school background was like as film was leaving, and basically we kind of approached it as like, well, the pretty much the only way we know how to assess what film looks like is to directly profile the results of using film. So that was kind of our inspiration for how we decided to create Filmbox, right? Was like we decided we wanted to take a data-driven approach and not try and like do any guesswork really, but rather just like shoot film, develop it like you would develop at a Premiere development facility and
Mm-hmm.
print it at a Premiere development facility and then sample all that data and use that to generate a profile of the particular film stock. And obviously in order to do that, we created a lot of like custom hardware and software that would allow us to do that. I don't know, Andrew, if you want to talk about any of that or if
Yeah, I
I
mean, I
touched that
guess
completely.
there's two main things when it comes to profiling film. The first one is just like, what are you going to profile?
Yeah.
Because especially now, film has you can make it look like anything, and there's some people will shoot film negative and scan it, and they'll say that's what film looks like, but it's like, well, that's a log image. You did something to it to make it the way it looks now. That's a LUT. That's a form of emulation. That's a hybrid. You know, there's just so many looks you can get out of film, especially now, probably more so than in the past. But so first step was like, well, we need to decide on what we're emulating. And so the goal initially, actually, we just wanted to emulate scanned negative because we were sort of thinking like, well, we kind of just want to be able to like give you what you would have gotten if you shot film in modern day, which would be a film scan. And and then we realized, well, that's one step and that is useful, but like we should actually profile what film is supposed to be. And so that's printed negative. That's a whole different thing. It actually has a more defined look. Like it will pretty much Vision 3 stock printed to 2383 looks a very specific way. There are things you
Yeah.
can do to push and pull against that, but like it's a thing that looks away. And so it's first of all useful to have a very specific target, one that means something to people. And then the second thing is like, yeah, you have to now gather every shred of data empirically about every aspect of its response, not just color, not just exposure, not you also have to do spatial response, grain, texture, try to do everything in a way that's not like exposed an image and then looked at it and tried to use our hand to like grade something that looks the same, although that's a useful thing to do, but we need something that like responds to light identically under all conditions, which I guess, that should be obvious. That is sort of what film profiling is. But yeah, so we built a lot of hardware to that end. We have a thing called, we call it the light box, that is a computer controlled thing that we can't talk too much about, but that's a big piece of our color profiling. And then,
I was gonna say on the software end of that, we built some software in order to like build profiles based
yeah,
off of those data sets. Well,
yeah. So a lot of custom
Yeah.
hardware, a lot of custom software, but the end of the day, it's just gathering dense data sets about every little piece of this phenomena and then reproducing it.
Yeah, you guys have done a fantastic job. One of the things that I thought was so interesting is the fact that, like, when I push and pull using Filmbox, I get the accurate skew that I would expect. And to be honest, I don't think I've seen that in a film emulation product before. That was something that I was really surprised about, is I got a accurate skew that I was expecting when I pushed and pulled towards the magenta and green. I forgot which stock I was using, but I was like, whoa, that was really cool. So
Yeah.
I
So
wasn't expecting. Mhm.
part of it is like it's not a monolithic. I mean, the idea is to like have data about scene referred data about your shot go in, and then a fully emulated thing come out the other end, and have what happens in the middle be identical to like shooting that scene with film and printing it without any sort of guesswork between that. And so that was one step of the emulation. Then the second step is to like within that perfectly end-to-end accurate thing, insert an intermediary point, which is the negative scan, so that you have like basically a negative emulation and a print emulation that add up to an actual contact printed negative. And so you can do things then as you would to a negative scan, which include using printer lights to push and pull and things like that, to like change the nature of both of those processes to like have them do what you want. So yeah, it's not just like a lot. It's like this multi-part thing, and you can do things in between it. And that was something we thought was important.
yeah, the lab tools were something that like we almost for push and pull, for instance, is almost something you get for free by designing the film emulation the way we did.
Hmm.
Which is that, it's okay. We can push, since we're working in scene linear, we can photometrically increase the exposure of the input image, and then we are working with essentially a Cineon printing density type response, and we know how to pull it back. We push the exposure, pull back.
And all of
So
the spatial characteristics go along with that, like halation,
yes.
grain.
Yeah. And right. Like you overexpose, your halation is going to look way different than if you underexpose. If you overexpose and pull it back, you're going to see a lot different halation characteristics. So if you like pixel peep, you'll see, especially like around like a medium to bright area of the image, like, and you push the lab setting, you'll see the halation change. You'll see the grain response change because those happen, that exposure, that overexposure or underexposure is happening before the negative emulation, right? So it should
Hmm.
respond accordingly. So that was
I
Another
something.
love
piece of
that.
that was that we also wanted people to be able to disable the print emulation and grade the negative however they want, because
Yeah,
like a
work
lot
in
of the
between.
yeah, and this maybe goes to like what we finally ended up doing, whereas we want to try to provide all the film looks, but the idea being that like a lot of what people feel film is actually a scanned negative that they then do some color grading to, or use a lot that they're used to, or there's a lot of like a lot of creative processes that start with a negative scan, and so we wanted to be able to emulate that part of the process accurately so that people can then sort of do whatever they normally do to a film scan on top of Filmbox also.
100%. Going back to what I was talking about on Scatter, one of the things that I really have come to like about Filmbox is the fact that you guys didn't stop at just like step one, like, okay, we profiled the film and you can just apply it like a LUT. You guys seem to be emulating every single step of the process so that I can work with a DP as if I'm in a digital lab. Like that to
Yeah.
me is what allows me to establish the trust, which is going to say, well, do you want a digital style look, or do you want a hybrid look, or do you want to go full celluloid?
Right.
Yeah. In fact, we kind of run into a shortage of terms when we're trying to name parameters or do documentation or something, because it's like, yeah, there's I don't know, like not everyone has the same creative language about like what does a telecine look like. There's so much difference between, especially since people are watching historic movies on Blu-ray. It's like, well, are you looking at a film print of this movie, or are you looking at a digital transfer? And does that like when was it done? Like they had very different ideas about like how a
Yeah.
telecine should happen in the in the early 2000s versus now. And so it's like it's tricky. There's film is
Telecines,
so many things.
the telecine look back in the 90s did not look so good. You see a lot of like really strange highlights that are like burnt to a crisp and kind of like orange. Yeah, I don't know what the deal was there. You can look at like maybe lower budget TV shows that didn't really get
Well, it's
much love, and
I'm
you'll
watching,
see that
yeah,
that.
I'm watching Scrubs at the moment, and it's like I don't know if people think of that as the film look, but it's film, and it
Hmm.
looks like
Hmm.
film, but it doesn't look
Yeah.
like There Will Be Blood,
I think
you
Scrubs
know?
was 16 mil. That's Super 16
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah,
I'm a Law and Order obsessive, and so I watched all 26 seasons of the
yeah,
original. I
Mm.
mean, it's shot on 16 millimeter film, and that is not what people
yeah.
are thinking about when they're like, "I want the real film look."
Yeah,
It's like
But
right,
then
right,
this is
right.
not what you're thinking
occasionally
about.
that is what someone wants, and it's like it's hard for them to get that using words, if unless
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
a colorist themselves.
Yeah, it's and I appreciate that you're giving the additional controls, and you're actually like tying them to what they used to be. So somebody that is familiar or may have worked on these original hardware pieces or actually worked as a telecine machine is going to be able to be pretty familiar with Filmbox and go, oh, this is how it looked and maybe not felt, but this is how it looked when I was done with this.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't work on a telecine machine, even though I would have loved to. But I am getting when I work with this a very similar feeling as to when I'm matching to some of the. I mean, clients have brought in telecines and saying make this as close as possible, and I've had to work a lot harder with some of the native tools that I have from Filmbox. So I think you guys have done a great job. Moving on to the new Pro update that you guys
Yeah.
just launched a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's we added 90 plus. I don't even remember the number, but 90 plus. So I mean, for context, Filmbox came with four negatives for all of the Vision 3 negatives, basically, but that was only four, and we added like 95 or something new ones across a lot of different types of photochemical imaging. So the beginning of this whole thing was that we wanted to, or I wanted to add still photography back in. I don't know, 3 years ago. Filmbox was out, a lot of people were using it, and we had never really expected to add stocks to it. We also kind of felt like we wouldn't be able to get our hands on much in the way of different motion picture negatives because they were all out of production at
Mhm.
that point, with the exception of Actachrome, I guess. And so we kind of thought, well, we could add still photo negatives. That would be interesting, at least. And we kind of thought about, well, maybe we'd make a still photo oriented product. And so I began the process of doing the Filmbox treatment to like every piece of still photography emulsion that I could find. And then at some point we transitioned into like, oh, I guess we should also include some of the low hanging fruit that we didn't the first time around, like bleach
Mhm.
bypass, Actachrome. I believe it was re-released. Anyway, so we did
And
Actachrome, and Actachrome is
specifically,
also
cross
an interest.
process
Well, we
ectochrome.
did all of them basically. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
Actachrome's
it's true.
interesting
Yeah, yeah.
because you can process it at ECN2, you can process it E6, you can process it C41, all these things. Euphoria had used it, but there was a lot of
Thanks,
confusion
Euphoria.
about what it is because it's a reversal stock. But that's not how Euphoria used it, as far as I can tell. They processed it ECN2 as a negative. So anyway, yeah, we were like, well, we should make sure we've exhausted every negative in production. And then we had this contact, Gus Bendinelli, who
It's a DP.
he's a DP, yeah. He does really great work. He shoots film constantly, a lot of small gauge things too, like 8 millimeter and 16 millimeter. And he and some other people he knew had an enormous collection of old cinema negatives, basically every one that they could possibly find from anyone's collection, and it covered a lot of stuff. And so he had actually reached out to us when we first started Filmbox, but we didn't get around to profiling his stuff. But he reached out just in time, like a year ago, and for us to like be doing this update, and we did several days of production to profile all his stuff, and they all came in the craziest cans and all these like labels and stuff. But so at that point we had like tons of material to add, and then we sort of like started thinking, well, we could probably improve all these different functions while we're in here, adding these new
And yeah,
stocks.
added ton of new things that people have asked for over the years that we couldn't really easily fit into the existing
Yeah,
plugin. Things like grain, more granular, literally grain
yeah,
controls, especially in terms of like its coarseness and it's like the streaks you get from the negative, and also like the kind of HDR level, like, our HDR highlights are looking really spicy with this grain, and so you can kind of like dial it back. Crazy things like that. We can obviously get into those things later, but
yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
just
The
we
we
HDR
kind of
highlights.
like, it's not quite kitchen sink level of philosophy, but like we definitely added like a ton of features that users had asked for over the years, and that things that we found to be personally useful, and that's kind of been the new motto for internally, is like add it if it is good.
I mean, that's a great motto. I mean, of my two favorite features, other than the new stocks, I really, really appreciate the HDR grain feature because I was one of those people that found the grain a little spicy and the
Mm,
highlights. But
yeah.
also, I really love the aura. I am a halation nerd. I think it's fantastic. I know people overuse it, but I love Cinestill film. And
yeah,
obviously, to get that ridiculous over the top halation from Cinestill, you have to take it to 11. And
yeah,
we
Yeah.
couldn't do that previously. Obviously, it wasn't realistic, but to match that, you really have to crank it.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's actually a whole different system than halation, or it required a whole different system. But yeah, I
We
mean,
had to
that was.
invent the name for it too, because we didn't really have like a good name to distinguish it from normal
I mean, that is a
halation. So we,
term, but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
yeah, it's
Yeah, but it's different. I get it. And
we're
honestly,
definitely
you don't
running
want
out
to
of
be like,
terms.
is it halation 2.0? Like I like that you
yeah,
guys named it something different or like glow or something.
yeah,
I
yeah.
like aura. I thought that was very appropriate, and I was like, I immediately knew what it was. I was like, oh yeah, that's the Cinestill thing. Totally.
There
Well, and it's
might
funny because
you
we wouldn't have thought to add that system unless we were doing the still photo stocks, and it's like, well, we got to do cine still, so we had
Yeah,
to build the system for that. And then
Amazing.
it's like, well, you should be able to put that on everything because it's very cool.
yeah.
I mean, yeah, it has its place. Obviously, I wouldn't it would not look good on a full feature film for the whole time, but I mean, when
Not
it's
in its
used properly,
default. Not in its default
yeah,
state.
not
You
on its
can
default.
actually tweak it to do some interesting things. I was kind of playing around with it the other day, and you can really make it a very subtle effect if you want. It's just kind of the default look is like the Cinestill, like anti-halation layer missing sort of look.
Yeah. I have this hope that I think people are going to start using halation more creatively as opposed to like, it just has to look like film. Like for me, now that we have this ability to not just like, oh, it's just, it happens and it always looks like this, I'm hoping that we see some creative uses of halation now that you can do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a ton of them, but we'll see. That's my ultimate hope. Now, I want to ask you guys, because it says 98 stocks here. What of your stocks and features, each of you, what is your favorite thing that you've added recently?
I'm a pretty big fan of Fuji 400, Superia 400, the still
Mhm.
photo stock. I've actually started to do a lot of iPhone RAW photography, and we have a secret internal tool that allows us to take iPhone RAW and turn
We're
it
not talking
into.
about that. We're not talking about that.
Anyway, I'm doing raw photography on my phone and using Filmbox, and like I don't know, something about the way the shadows go green is very cool to me. It's not something you really would get from a clean cinema approach. It's more of a street photography thing. But
That's an answer. I personally have enjoyed using some of the new still photo stocks. I, got into still film photography after college a little bit and was shooting a lot of Ektar and Portra, obviously, as you
Mhm.
do. And so it's been great to use those. And obviously, like some of the high ISO black and white stuff has also been fun to play around with, even though it can be a bit much in motion. It's good for still processing, but you can also dial down the amount later if you need to. But yeah.
I've also been enjoying some of the older Fuji negatives, cinema negatives. Some also like those are expired. Like we didn't obviously didn't profile them in the 90s, so they have like their character plus the expired character. Some of the things that happen are really interesting, and a lot of types of scenes they do something that is like you would not choose to build in those characteristics if you were designing the thing by hand, and it's
Mhm.
really fun to play around with all that stuff. I don't it doesn't work for
Yeah.
everything, but especially high dynamic range scenes, it does really interesting stuff.
We should note probably that Andrew did a lot of like not only the color profiling, but every film stock has its own grain profile and halation for the
Inhalation,
most
yeah,
part. So,
yeah,
I mean, when you're changing the film stock settings, you're not getting the same grain. You're getting the profile grain for that stock. You can go and change it, in the advanced settings. You can go and set your own. I was like, oh, actually, I want this other grain profile instead. But yeah, these are like presented as profiled. So the grain is not like some generic grain that's applied in alongside these color transformations. It's tailored to each stock.
It's part of the profile that you guys
It
built.
is,
Like,
yeah. Same goes for Vision 3 and all the, that's how Filmbox has always been. But obviously, we just have a lot more now. And so I just wanted to emphasize the amount of work that Andrew has done for that. That is not a non-zero amount of work
yeah,
to get us there. So
it sounds incredibly impressive. And so one more question about the grain. I know a lot of people have differing opinions about grain, whether the grain is sitting on top, whether it's integrated, whether it's actually created with the image data. What do you guys think about that? And how do you guys creating your grain? I'm curious. It looks
Yeah.
great, so I don't necessarily care, but I'm curious about your philosophy.
Yeah, grain is a really tricky thing to discuss with people because obviously if you can like something or dislike something and you're right about that because it's your experience. But grain is like incredibly dependent on the scan. I mean, the people talk about the size of grain, and there is some truth to that, but a lot of what they mean when they say size is actually how sharp was the scan. To some degree down to 16 millimeter, like it's amazing how much you can make a grain pattern look totally different or exactly the same across film gauges, across types of, like emulsion and all this stuff.
and
And
we should note that Super 16 film is just cut down from the larger. It's the same celluloid as what's used in 35,
yeah,
for
and at some
example.
point you are going to
It's
see different
magnified.
structure in there.
You're
Yeah.
magnifying it, right? When you're scanning it, you're seeing it closer, which might reveal some things. But it
Well,
is
and
the
there are,
same.
yeah, I mean, there are some differences. Like there are obviously at some point you're seeing the dye clouds differently and all this stuff.
Yeah,
But I think
yeah.
that a lot of people have this perception that like you're seeing actual granules, like single granules when you're looking at like a 35 millimeter scan. It's like, no, they're way
No.
smaller.
Yeah.
And this is like, and it's very, also you can like soften a 35 millimeter scan and it'll look completely different, the grain structure, or depending on how it was scanned, even if the scanner is slightly out of focus and things like that. So it's amazing how dependent it is on resolution and sharpness. That said, grain does look a certain way. Like it obviously isn't noise. It is a very real thing that has a very real distribution of frequencies, and the dye clouds look a certain way and all this stuff. And it applies in a very specific way across the tonal range and all that stuff. So there's definitely a wrong way to emulate film grain, and we think we've done it right. But there is a lot of variability in what grain looks like, even from the exact same negative. And so, yeah, and then the other piece of it is like, well, is it integrated into the image or not? And that is also like, I think largely a function of like, do you have image detail that is smaller than whatever the granules feel like? So like if you have soft grain and you've applied it to a very sharp image, it's not going to look right. It's not going to look integrated. It's going to look like you have a grain texture on top of some unrelated image data. But if the detail and the perceptual sharpness of the grain match, the brain is like, yeah, that's real. And in my experience, there isn't really, beyond like tonal distribution and edge effects and things like that, there isn't really such a thing as like, is it part of the image? Like, it's not actually like at 35 millimeter scale, at least, it's not moving image detail around as it moves. Like, the stuff that's focused by the lens is like pretty much staying where it is, and the grain is like undulating to produce those image structures, but it's not like a displacement map, which I think some people sort of feel like it is or should be, but it will read as being overlay or something if it doesn't have the same character as the underlying image data. And so that is one thing we've struggled with a little bit because we don't want to blur your image. So, like, I mean, to some degree, halation is going to cause you to lose sharpness because that's just how it is. But we don't want to say, like, well, you really can't have, if you want grain of this character, you really can't have an image detail of that resolution. We don't want to make that decision for you. You kind of have to do it yourself. And so you can get into a situation where it's like you have an incredibly sharp image and you've got halation turned down, but you want this sort of soft 16 millimeter grain, and it doesn't make any sense to the brain because it's
I get it.
it's kind of weird. But
It's interesting that way because I know a lot of people have that problem. And I think the toughest thing that people want to do, it's pretty easy to create grain that is highly visible. But I think what a lot of people are trying to do is create the feeling of grain without people going, oh, there's film grain on this.
Mhm.
And I think that's a lot tougher to have exist in a rendered out file.
Yeah, and to some extent, I think one thing I want to emphasize is like I don't want to call people crazy. Like people will be very adamant that like I think everyone is after something real creatively. Like there is when people say whatever they say about film emulation or grain or sharpness or any of these things, it's like they're experiencing something real. It's just very hard for them to like go from that to like what is the actual technical cause and therefore solution to this problem. And I think what I've noticed for myself perceptually is like kind of all these characteristics that add up to film, you kind of can't take one without the other to some degree. Like if you want the image to feel to have this like organic granular nature, you kind of can't remove that from like what also needs to sort of have the halation character. It also needs to render detail the same way. And to some extent, I've also kind of found like it also kind of needs gate weave. Like if you want to pixel peep and be like, well, this grain doesn't feel like it's like driving these image structures, it's like some of that's kind of because you have no gate weave on this, and the pixel is staying right where it is. Whereas like this would be just moving even in a sub-pixel way if this was a
Even in a
film
pin
scan.
registered, even if it were a pin registered scan, right? There is still gate weave. And in fact, we've, I believe, only ever
Right.
had
Yeah.
our
Yeah. It's funny because we
film scanned
emulate
in it.
Gatewave, but our Gatewave emulation is a pen registered scan. Like it's not.
Yeah, but well, no, but it's coming from the camera. It's the movement in the
Yeah.
camera, right? For the most part. And
Obviously, even
so the
more if you were looking at a film print, because that's a whole other thing. But we,
yeah, right.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
our gate weave is driven by the camera system. It's like, emulating the camera system, the movement in the camera system, and not being like perfectly, not like having it form fit
Oh, and
and
Yeah.
even
completely
beyond that,
advanced.
even if you motion track image features in a film scan, you're still going to have some sub-pixel
You'll see it.
thing that moves,
Yeah.
and it feels a little different every frame. And so, to some extent, it's like, well, you kind of have to turn all the things on to some degree if you're after a certain character.
It almost feels like when you try and do it without it, it's almost like, I want junk food, but I want it to be healthy. It's
Right.
like you don't get both. You can only
Yeah.
have one.
And of course, you can make, you can and should make the image look however you want. It's not like you should make something look like real film. Like you should totally break what film looks like and do your own creative stuff. It's just if someone is after something specific that is filmic, it's probably important to like make sure you try it with all of the aspects of film first and then subtract away the things that you really don't need or sharpen the image
Yeah.
up a bit if it's too soft or, things like that.
And that's also
And
why, I mean, not necessarily why, but it is maybe a good thing to point out that we also offer a way of like, you can bring your own color emulation or lack thereof into our process and get still the halation and grain, the textural effects of Filmbox with your own look applied completely. Like it should ideally be in the realm of like a film emulation look, maybe. But it's pretty permissive. You can use halation grain only mode to get a lot of different looks out of it. And I think in the high end is the most common use of Filmbox because colorists and DPs want to bring their own look to it. And I totally makes sense. Is how a lot of colorists make a living is like they have their own secret sauce and their own look. And so we want to be able to participate in that process as well. Because like a lot of colorists don't want to have to like come up with their own halation or grain look. Some colorists do really love nerding out on that stuff. And then some are just like, no, I'd rather just like have a predefined set of tools that allow me to play with it a little
yeah,
bit, but get a good look out of the box and do the job of what I need. So
I get that. And to be honest,
yeah.
I have to point out that you guys have gone full circle. You guys went from the film box that just takes SDI in and puts a single look out to now we are talking about we want to be as flexible as possible. You can apply any look or just use halation and grain. So I have to point
We
that out. Like
listen.
you've
We listen to people,
Yeah.
and
We're not always
halation
right.
grain, and grain was something we added pretty early on into the release, like after the initial release. But it was something that was requested a lot by high-end colorists, color grading movies that you would see in a theater, or on TV. That was the impetus. We're like, we of course want to have colorists use Filmbox in that capacity. It was like not an easy thing to add either. Like we needed it to still, it's a interesting request, because it's like basically you're asking us to emulate these aspects of film that kind of require the color pipeline as well, but like in a more generic way. So that was a kind of a challenge that it took us a while to arrive at a solution that is mostly workable, and obviously lots of people use it. So proof is in the pudding.
Yeah. So I will ask you guys one last question. Where do you guys see Filmbox, Scatter, all your Video Village tools going? Do you guys have any surprises that you'd like to share with us? I know you just dropped Filmbox Pro, so that's not really a fair question, but
I mean, the immediate thing is are working on a thing called Filmbox Looks that I don't. It might be out by the time this airs, but it's basically a fraction of the cost and is far more preset based. So back to when we sort of were talking about Filmbox as like this format that's simple, we've obviously changed that approach a bit and added every bell and whistle and configuration and stock, and tried to like please everyone who wanted more control and more variability, and it's a very full featured thing now. And Looks is sort of going to be like, okay, we want to make a cheaper film box, and we also kind of want to make a simpler film box. It's not cheap in terms of like you can't do good work with it. It's just like we're going to go in and like find the best of Filmbox and make it a one-click thing, and that you can then of course be creative with it. You can change it, do things before or after it. You can change your footage and all that. So it'll be more of like a quicker, simpler, like this is a format type thing, kind of like Filmbox started out. So that's the thing that's immediately in the pipeline. And then we would love to do something for the still photography world, like largely because I am constantly using it on stills. A lot of our customers are photographers and are kind of trying to use it in Resolve, and we're like, sorry, it's not easy in there. Honestly, Blackmagic should probably
It's,
make a still photo app, but anyway,
they
uh,
absolutely should. Please.
yeah.
I'm on that ballpark as well. I know a ton of people that use Resolve for still photo, so I have a feeling that we are not the only people. If people wanted to find out more about you guys, more about Video Village and all the cool stuff that you make, where can we learn more about that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously our website is the main place, and then
Videovillage.com is the main place.
we are
And then,
slowly reviving our social channels, Instagram mostly, and
yeah, and then obviously
um,
always can reach out to us at our support email,
yeah,
support@videovillage.com.
we see what
We
goes in
feel
there, most
we
of it.
field any and all inquiries.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. All of that info will be in the show notes. And for the Video Village team, thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on the show. It's been really a true pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
And for Color and Coffee, I'm Jason Bodak. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Happy grading. And that's a wrap. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and your podcast app of choice. Search for @Color and Coffee or @Color and Coffee Podcast and join the conversation. If you're using Spotify or Apple Podcast, please leave a review. Huge thanks to FSI, DeMystify Color, and PixelTools for sponsoring the show. Until the next episode,